Now I have here with me a panel which I'll introduce to you. Allow me to introduce them quickly by name and role, and then you can welcome them with a round of applause when I've finished, if you don't mind. So from your left and my left, we have Chris Guest, who's the Group Climate Change Lead at Kingfisher. We have Britta Gallus, the Head of Corporate Responsibility at Metro. Then we have Anita Gerstein, the Managing Director of European Affairs and Sustainability and Head of the Brussels representation for HDE. We have Elina Bardram joining us, also from the European Commission, from DG CLIMA, in her role as Director of Adaptation and Resilience, Communication and Civil Society Relations. Then we have Breathnach, the Strategy Manager of Accenture, also with a focus on retail race to zero. And last by no means least, on your right, we have Jan Wyckaert, the Director of Rikolto, Belgium. Could we welcome them, please, with a round of applause? Right, diplomatic protocol and introductions over. Let's get straight down to things. So this panel, as I mentioned, will focus on sustainability, particularly why and how sustainability can be an opportunity, with a focus not just on the what, but very much on the how, looking at solutions. I'm going to do it in two parts for the next hour up to lunch. First, I want to focus in on sustainability, but then in the second part, we'll also narrow our focus down to the issue also of decarbonisation within that sustainability agenda. And then, assuming our speakers are timely with their interventions, and I do my job well, we should have a budget of time also for you as an audience to be posing some questions to our speakers as well, to wrap things up before lunch. So as we're working through the different questions I've got for our panellists on the sustainability agenda, I'd also like you to be thinking of any questions you have, and I'll do my very best to get in as many questions from you, the audience, as we can to take us to lunchtime. So with that in mind, let's get straight down to business then. And Chris, I'm going to dive in first with you. So look, in your role as Group Climate Change Lead at Kingfisher, obviously you've had a lot of experience of what it means to make sustainability transformation. The study we saw earlier from McKinsey sets out some investment ideas that could help advance sustainability, not just for retailers, but also for wholesalers. So in that context, which elements do you think are particularly important or relevant from the Kingfisher perspective?
Of course, thanks, David. Maybe for those in the audience who are not so familiar with who we are at Kingfisher, we are an international home improvement retailer with about 1,500 stores across 7 European countries. And we've really put the sustainability transformation at the heart of our corporate strategy. But the reality is we're very much at the start of that journey. And I think the types of investments identified in the McKinsey Eurocommerce study are all relevant and they're all important to us. And I think really to drive a sustainability transformation within a business, you need to be investing in your operations, your product offering, and also how you use resources. For example, we have committed to achieving net zero emissions within our operations by 2040. We have a 5-point plan for delivering that. It will require, the investments required to deliver that plan will lead to a substantial transformation in how we heat and power our stores and how we fuel our delivery fleets. But the reality is, I think, as a home improvement retailer, at a time of an energy crisis, I think providing that sustainable products offering has become more important and more relevant than ever. 90%, over 90% of our carbon emissions come from the products we sell. The majority of those emissions come from customers consuming energy to power our products, whether they be light bulbs or power drills. And this is at a time when 3/4 of homes in our key markets are energy inefficient, and 9 in 10 of our customers are looking at ways of reducing their own energy use. So there's a real opportunity, I think, for us as a home improvement retailer to drive value creation through investing in the product offerings which help our customers lower their energy bills and ultimately reduce our Scope 3 emissions. And I've just finished by mentioning 10% of our group revenues are already come from energy and water saving products. We've recently launched a range of services across our key markets to help customers diagnose where they can save energy within their home and to get access to appropriate financing support, access to tradespeople, and we have a target for 60% of our group sales by 2025 to come from broader, sustainable product ranges. So I think in summary for us, all of the investments proposed by McKinsey in the study are relevant, but right now, in the current context for us, I think providing that sustainable product offering is more important and relevant than ever.
So that's the primary priority amongst those for you then?
I would certainly say so, yeah.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Chris. So Britta, moving on to you then, looking at it from Metro's perspective. Again, you've got the experience, obviously, through Metro of supply chain management and corporate responsibility. And you're obviously bringing in insight into the challenges that the food sector faces. What do you see as the opportunities and challenges within the sustainability transformation?
Thanks for the question. Well, first, some words about Metro. Metro is a wholesale company, so our customers are the restaurants and the traders, and we are operating in more than 30 countries. And let's say one challenge, but at the same time, obviously an opportunity, is to bring together our business strategy with our sustainability strategy, right? And from business strategy point of view, we are at the moment reorienting our stores towards our main focused customer groups, which are the HoReCa and the trader customers. We are increasing our own brands and our food service distribution. And we are investing in digitalization. So, for example, in our digital platform, our marketplace, Metro Markets, and in our Dish platform, a platform for our HoReCa customers to, let's say, to make the life easier for the hotels and for the restaurants. And we are investing in the fields of sustainability. We are in decarbonization, investing in the different areas in FSD, all that. But one really most important point from my perspective is to bring that together and to meet our targets. So you mentioned already here some, let's say, some targets for the scope 1, let's say 2, 3. And just to mention, one of the Metro targets is to being climate neutral by 2040. Right, and we do have some other targets, but I think we will come to this during the discussion.
Indeed, but I take from what you've said there in terms of dual opportunity and challenge, for you it's about integrating the different strands of sustainability policy together.
Right, which are for definitely the decarbonization topic, so the climate neutrality, and the, let's say, the social aspects is also a very important point for us, which is the second pillar of our ESG strategy before we come to the people, to have an inclusive culture and a diverse workforce. So those things have to go together, the business, let's say the business strategy and the sustainability strategy together.
Yeah. Now we've had a focus a little bit there from different sectors within retail and wholesale. Antje, now I want to bring the focus perhaps a little bit more to SMEs, which are also obviously highly relevant in this discussion. Now, the study suggests, the McKinsey Eurocommerce study, talks about 25 billion of specific investment for SMEs on making the sustainability transformation by 2030. So large numbers again. But I know that about 90% of retailers and wholesalers in Europe are in fact SMEs. And there's a general tendency, if I'm not wrong, that they lack expertise and resources to transform easily. So in that context, are there any particular recommendations in the study from your point of view? And also, I'd be interested in your insights about what HDE in Germany does to support SMEs in their sustainability transformation.
Yeah, first of all, also thank you for having me here on the panel. And 2 words on HDE. This is the German Retail Federation, and we are representing actually big and small enterprises, online and offline, and really understand ourselves as the retail association in Germany covering all business models that they are multi-channel. So, and I think that's important for our whole self-understanding, but also for our approach towards SMEs. Now, you've been asking about particularly important recommendations. I think the whole outset of the study is quite interesting, putting the 3 big chapters together: digital, sustainability, and skills. And indeed, I think all this is very much interconnected. And this is also how we try to help particularly SMEs. So we have in HDE 2 projects that are actually also funded or supported with federal money from our Ministry of Economics, helping SMEs to transform digitally, but also giving them advice, for example, for energy efficiency. And of course, you need to have digital skills in order to make perfect use of energy efficiency possibilities. So it's all interconnected, and what we try to do is really make sort of low-key offers that are easy to implement, are not too costly, but at the same time, let's say on a political level, also make sure that we have an enabling regulatory environment, that we, for example, also have initiatives together with our government to strengthen city centers, to make it possible to have night logistics, which would be more sustainable, to work on new models of city center traffic to make it more attractive. You know, so what I'm trying to say, you cannot isolate just sustainability support. You have to see it in a kind of overarching and comprehensive way.
I take clearly your point about the interconnection between the three aspects of the triple transformation. Indeed, digital is a gateway to sustainability, as you've mentioned, and also skills for many, particularly perhaps from the SME perspective. Thanks. So, Elina, I'll bring the focus now onto you a little. I mean, as I mentioned to you as we were speaking, your microphone should be on, don't worry. Retail and wholesale have stepped up and tried to step up to the challenges of the pandemic, the current crisis in Ukraine, the deep energy crisis and high inflation. And the sector knows it needs to transform. We heard about this earlier in three ways simultaneously, with the costs that implies, of course, as well. And one notable fact that came out from our earlier discussions as well, I think that has to be said, is about retail margins and wholesale margins. In Europe, we saw how the margins in the sector are low. Yeah, for example, retail and wholesale for food, it's 1 to 3%, and in non-food, it's 4 to 11%. And it varies significantly from subsector to subsector. Within that context, I think everyone here in the room is very interested to hear from your perspective, as I know they often are with the European Commission, but what's the Commission doing and going to do to support the retail and wholesale sector in meeting the costs that are inherent to this necessary triple transformation that people are on board with, but what support mechanisms do you have and will you have to help enable the sector in that transformation?
Thanks very much for that. I think it's very important to look at kind of the macro level, what's driving the net zero transition and what is the European vision in that context. With the 2019 Green Deal, the Commission, in its very early stages of this mandate, already charted the kind of direction of travel very clearly. The European Green Deal is nothing short of a reboot of our economic model. So it will undoubtedly impact the way we produce, the way we consume, and the way we do business in Europe, but also worldwide. So there is no underestimation of the volume or the magnitude of the challenge. Now, the European Green Deal is not just about climate or environment policies. It is about a broad range of measures across the different policy departments of the Commission, including industrial strategy, including sustainable finance, including things such as energy sector transformation and agriculture. So it is really about the whole of the economy approach. And clearly, we do see that there are very important ecosystems, if you like, that underpin that transformation. And indeed, in our industrial strategy, the retail sector has been identified as one of the 14 critical ecosystems that need to be enablers of this transition. And it is a twin transition or a triple transition, if you like. So we do understand the demands that there are in the terms of marrying the digital solutions together with the low carbon solutions and the skill agenda. So it is a very complex challenge. Now, since the Green Deal was adopted, of course, there's been external shocks that nobody had envisaged. There is no crystal ball that could have foreseen the COVID pandemic or the war in Ukraine, for that matter. Fortunately, the Green Deal has been able to withstand those external shocks. So with the COVID recovery and the Recovery and Resilience Funds, which are also relevant in today's conversation, we have taken the Green Deal as a central guidance for the investment of the member states in the recovery efforts. So while much of the investment is decided at the member state level due to the subsidiary principle, and also the member states' authorities knowing best where relief and support for different sectors is placed, it is an unprecedented volume that has been made available. In the later stages, with the Repower EU, which was adopted this spring in order to help us deal with the energy price shocks and the supply challenges that we have had, we have come forward with an extensive set of measures that are intended to help the European economy and the different sectors to deal with the price fluctuations, the supply uncertainties, etc. And I do think that many of those measures have also had implications and have been felt in the different sectors, including retail and SMEs. Again, much has to be left for the national authorities that are best placed to deal with the local challenges. But the Commission will be following the progress very closely. There are certain funds that are available already within the financial framework. There is the LIFE program, which supports specifically SMEs on their efforts to green. There are the Horizon funds that are relevant for more research-oriented activities. And there are other investment facilities, and those are readily available in the Commission websites. And I'll be happy to provide some of those links later on. It's not the Commission's role as a regulator, though, to be a bank. And that's where kind of the limitations to what we have in terms of our multi-annual financial framework goes. Those frameworks are negotiated for a 7-year perspective after very, very difficult decisions and compromises together with the member states and the Parliament. And at the end of the day, those 7-year perspectives also guide and provide predictability for our operations. Final point that I would say is that our colleagues in DG GROW, the Commission department in charge of industrial relations and SMEs and retail sector, they are working on a transition pathway. So it is supposed to be a blueprint for helping the retail sectors and other industrial sectors to deal with the challenges of the twin transition, as we refer to, and as you've noted, the skills agenda is an important component as well. Thanks.
Yeah, indeed, and we'll be dialoguing a little with DG GROW later on as well, in fact, on that very theme. And just specifically, again, picking up on the point I made earlier, that about 90% in Europe of the retail and wholesale sector are SMEs, whose capacity to enact significant transformation and rapidly is not the same, obviously, as much larger entities within the market. What specific things from the Commission side, and I know this links a little with DG GROW, but what specific aspects within all of your funding do you have focused particularly on SMEs?
Well, I already mentioned the LIFE program, which is something that helps particularly in identifying well, not identifying, it supports projects that are intended to help facilitate faster transition to low carbon models. And that's something that's quite interesting to SMEs. And depending on the area of business, there are other envelopes. But these are not huge, big funds. We also have the Innovation Fund, which will be supporting specifically innovation in terms of mobilizing some of the ETS revenues to support action in that area. And we also have the Just Transition Fund, which will be more focused on the coal-dependent or the less advanced economies in the member states.
Okay, noted. And any questions or reflections from what we've just heard from the Commission from anyone at this stage? Because I have one comment of mine, perhaps, and I know it's one you hear a lot, and I think everyone in the room welcomes the funds that have been made available. Everyone sees, of course, the value and potential in those funding opportunities. But one of the things if you'll allow me as an external moderator, a reflection, when I hear a lot of different funds being mentioned and cited, and I think SME, one of the first things that jumps into my mind is accessibility. And I wonder, with such a plethora or range of funding, to what degree is the Commission factored in across the different DGs that are interconnected on this about maximising accessibility of funding for particularly SMEs? Because frankly, it's something I hear a lot from SME representatives, that funding is there, but it can sometimes be very onerous or difficult to access.
Thanks for that question, and it is extremely pertinent. And we are trying to facilitate conversations between stakeholders, among other things, through the Climate Pact, which is a platform that brings together NGOs, businesses, civil society stakeholders to share experiences of these types of challenges that have been experienced. And it is almost a business of its own to process these applications. And I completely share the frustrations of those who have been responding to calls and one call after another, that there is just not sufficient financing available. So what we're trying to do is for instance, in the context of live programs or mission for adaptation, which is more for the cities and regions, is to kind of give a certificate of approval for those bids that did not qualify for one or another fund but have been vetted and already kind of...
So to avoid the duplication of procedure each time.
Precisely, because like with all big bureaucracies and institutions, and admittedly the Commission is one of those, there are sometimes parallel strands that, if we can avoid some of the duplication and also make it easier for the resource constrained applicants, if you like, then everybody wins. But what we can do is use our convening power, facilitate exchanges between the practitioners to find ways to kind of shortcut some of those accessibility problems. But needless to say, the work is not yet done.
No, I think on behalf of everyone I can say we appreciate your candour on this. So I take it then that the Commission is strongly aware of the challenge of accessibility for funding and is actively working to improve that as time goes by. One of the things we did hear from representatives of the sector earlier was the urgency in this transformation. The timelines are very short, so it's pleasing to hear that you're not only aware of that, but also taking active steps to try and improve accessibility to funding, particularly for SMEs. Thank you. So Doireann, moving on to you then, and switching a little towards the decarbonisation area and the retail race to zero as well. Decarbonising the sector is obviously one part of the sustainability transformation, and the investment needs we've seen are quite high, very high in fact. Now I know you're working at Accenture, but you're also closely linked to the retail race for zero, and you've also got background in the agri-food sector. So in that context, can you give us a quick overview of what the retail race to zero is and what you see as the opportunities it gives for large and small retailers?
Yeah. So the Race to Zero campaign is the largest collection of international bodies, businesses, education facilities that have a Paris-aligned agreement and target to net zero. So what it really offers is a pre-competitive space for companies in our sector, particularly the consumer sectors, to get together, because you're right, there's not enough resources, and collaboration is the name of the game, and we can't do it alone. We've seen maybe, I think it's 30% of the 2,000 largest companies with net zero targets, but only 8% say they can get there. And that's really because of the complexity of Scope 3. We've heard, and it's in the report, very clearly laid out what you can do around your Scope 1 and 2. So go and do it. Around Scope 3, you're talking about really tricky issues. Agriculture, regenerative ag, supplier enablement, plastics, packaging, consumer use. I mean, the breadth and scope and complexity of these issues are just huge, and that's why I would say don't do it alone. Many of the companies, many of the consumer foods retailers have shared suppliers. I hear stories from suppliers where they're given several different forms to fill in from retailers and from consumer goods companies about their carbon performance. So that just can't be the case. We need to come together and solve some of those really tricky problems. I think from a tactical point of view, initial ways to share some of that knowledge and collaborate. The Race to Zero recently published a playbook for consumer industries, which laid out 21 very clear interventions and 50 case studies to say, this is what you can do about your plastics and packaging, about your consumer use, about your supplier enablement. But it will really signify, to collaborate on this really signifies a change in the culture of consumer industries. It changed the way we share information in a pre-competitive way. And it's not easy, but it's so important. It's 30% of global emissions. So yeah, that's really what the Race to Zero is about, is finding those spaces for collaboration.
So it's about enhancing collaboration, particularly to target those Scope 3 emissions. I'm intrigued though, I mean, we've heard again about high inflation. I sound like a broken record here, but high inflation, spiking energy costs. What practical effect have they had on this Race to Zero campaign? Because I can't imagine they've had no effect.
It's mixed. The leaders are still leading. The ones that are absent from the conversation are still absent. It's really for us to keep sustainability and carbon center of focus, keep it on the C-suite agenda, and you can do that in two ways. One is looking at it from a cost reduction perspective, your Scope 1, and 2, an energy efficiency. There is no greater incentive than the current conflict and the current inflationary pressures to go and do something. And it makes the business cases easier. What we find a lot is we have sustainability people in organizations that are highly committed to the transition, but then when you go to the CFO, to the CMO, to our HR, it's, you know, we have a lot of competing priorities. So building that value case and that business case and getting the rest of the functions involved, deeply embedded in the agenda, and particularly the C-suite, is number one. But then we've seen consumer also being quite resilient in terms of how they think about their sustainable choices. They want longevity in their products more so than before. So how do you meet the needs of that consumer that are more cost conscious but also more quality conscious as well? And it's not, again, I sound like a broken record, it's not alone. It's farmer, trader, wholesaler, consumer goods, retailer, consumer. We all need to go together because it is a margin game as well. And without everybody in that supply chain moving together, one of those will take the hit.
I take it clearly then that degree of full value chain collaboration, in your opinion, has to improve, and it has to improve rapidly. I'm a big person on how. So that's the what and the why. I've got it clearly. But practically speaking, how can we, I mean, that's a big ask, isn't it? To bring together that many stakeholders quickly, collaboratively. If you had one or two key recommendations about, right, concretely, as of today, what do we do next then?
Well, for me, so it's spaces like this, Eurocommerce or CGF, so that's sharing, but then it's a data game, right? There's a lot of data, different emissions data, information, tools being stood up. I think there's a real need for one combined, shared view of carbon data across suppliers, so there's not multiple entries and multiple
we definitely need to solve the compatibility of data issue then, and have a standard that people can adhere to. It's valid throughout the value chain.
Absolutely.
And that's where an opportunity lies. Okay, clear. Chris, I'm going to come to you now, because correct me if I'm wrong, but Kingfisher's already signed up to the Retail Race for Zero. I'm intrigued, what are your experiences with the campaign so far? And where do you see the emission reduction opportunities related to that for the value chain, linking with what we've heard?
Of course, yeah. So I mean, in terms of for Kingfisher, our experiences with the Race to Zero campaign have been very positive so far, and we're very proud to have been a founding member of the Breakthroughs retail campaign alongside our partners at IKEA, H&M, Walmart and Best Buy. And I think the beauty of a Race to Zero is it provides a degree of credibility and consistency to carbon targets across borders. And I think that's absolutely essential to Doireann's point around ensuring consistent flows of data. Having consistent methodologies and standards that you're working to is absolutely essential within that. And I think for Kingfisher specifically, Race to Zero and the retail campaign has offered three things. It's offered that opportunity for collaboration across borders, working with like-minded retailers on shared challenges. It's allowed us to present a unified voice on policy issues. And I would also say that through the Retail Accelerators Initiative, of which I'm delighted to see that Eurocommerce and several national retail trade associations are now members, it provides the opportunity for deep collaboration, and it provides the opportunity to begin to transfer knowledge from larger retailers to smaller retailers, therefore addressing sometimes that capacity gap we've spoken about earlier.
Yeah.
And then, sorry, David, the sort of second question in terms of opportunities for collaboration. I think a lot of the investments that we've already spoken about in relation to the McKinsey study are absolutely essential, but really to maximise the benefits of those investments, I think requires the enabling conditions to be in place.
Well, it links me a little bit with a follow-up there to come in, because I'm also interested, okay, I see that there's a strong degree of consistency with what we heard there from Doireann as well. What barriers, on a practical level as an organisation, as Kingfisher, what barriers are standing in the way of what you want to achieve with the strategy you have for decarbonisation, for sustainability? Linked with what we've heard in terms of also retail Race to Zero.
Of course, yeah. I mean, I've seen this from my previous life working with other organisations as well, but the need for strong governance to keep sustainability top of the agenda, I think is both a barrier and an opportunity. I think the data point that we've spoken to, absolutely critical, ensuring we're working to the same methodologies and standards and have consistent flows of data.
And if I can ask then from your perspective, who should be setting these data standards?
It's a good question. I mean, there has been a lot of development in, I think, the private space, a lot of NGOs who've come together and forged a path. We've seen it with the Science Based Targets Initiative, we've seen it with the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, and that's been very effective. And those standards are now being reflected in disclosure regulations, reporting requirements, and I think that has worked quite well. I think there needs to be a degree of consistency across disclosure requirements.
But I pick up from the use of the term quite well that maybe there's still some space for improvement.
I think it's really a landscape which is settling down a little bit, and I think we've seen a position where especially larger companies are now familiar with many of the standards and are using them quite well, but the extent to which smaller businesses with less capacity to think about these issues are able to do so, I think that's a challenge. How do we make these standards methodologies proportionate to smaller retailers? And then also, I mean, the science is evolving all of the time. We've seen, for example, especially for food retailers, the need to understand emissions associated with land use, with forestry, with agriculture, and again, that's a real burden, I think, for companies to digest those standards and to begin to practically implement those standards. So there is an element of the landscape having to settle down.
I'm with you. I'll come back, Doireann, quickly to you on that, if you don't mind. Based on what you've heard from Chris there, and it's a similar question, we talk, okay, we're clear about what we feel here is the way forward. We need that intercompatibility of standards across national borders, across different parts of the sector. But who's going to bring this in? Where's this going to come from? Because we're talking here about quite short timescales as well.
Yeah, I think maybe I will defer to you, but I think that global coming, the US and the EU in particular, coming together in terms of reporting requirements. I always like to compare it to finance, right? In terms of when you say your performance and when you write your performance in your report, you're saying these are our targets, here's how we performed against our target. And then here's how it's audited. Here's how somebody is actually checking it. And that's what we will see, that it's no longer good enough to sign up to a target. It's no longer good enough to report on the target. What we will see is a continuously increasing demand on businesses for verifiable, audited carbon data. And that's no bad thing for a customer either, because the amount of sustainability claims on everything in our lives, surrounded by pictures of windmills everywhere, how does a consumer really differentiate between what a high-performing company that has that data-backed, auditable reports on how they're performing versus a company with a great marketing department? And that needs to be separated. That really does. And data and standards and reporting and giving it over to your CFO and say, manage this like you manage our money, is the only way, in my view, to do that.
Okay, so clear indications from your side. Elina, I'll come back to you then. I'm interested to know from the Commission perspective, how do you view the efforts that you've heard about here, Retail Race to Zero, and some of the efforts and focuses we've heard from some of our speakers? Do you think that the efforts from the sector are enough?
Thanks for that question, David. In my previous job, I was dealing very much with the international negotiations, and I've been following the conferences of the parties for too many years, and there's been this groundswell of enthusiasm and initiatives and pledges and net zero claims that has come about. But quite frankly, not all of that would stand the plush test in front of a jury, because some of that is clearly greenwashing. And that kind of impression that is now getting more and more shared among the general public is really detrimental to our collective efforts. And that's why I think it's for those who are genuinely committed to net zero transition to make sure that they have clear standards, clear methodologies, and that indeed they are able to be held accountable. Because if you don't measure what you manage, then you don't manage what you measure.
I'm with you, but allow me to be devil's advocate here, as I'm often going to be today. I've seen examples from other sectors, if I can be very honest with you, where the message has been from European level policymakers: solve your problems in-house and we'll support you. Show us effort and we'll back you. But then I've seen own industry initiatives not then be fully recognised in European benchmarking or standard setting. So I think one thing maybe here that the room would be interested to know is, so you see then that this approach of having clear compatibility of data is key, but from the European Commission's perspective, if the industry makes the efforts, if the sector makes the efforts in retail and wholesale to develop such things, can they be reassured that the Commission is going to recognise that type of activity in its own activity in terms of standards or recognition of things?
Well, it depends on the quality of the work, doesn't it? So, we have a chief standardization officer in DG GROW. We're definitely going to be looking at developing further standards at European level for both digital and green, not simply because it's in the interest of the consumer, but also because it's in the interest of the competitiveness of our economy. For instance, in the digital standardization game, China is claiming ground, and they're doing it faster than we care to realize. Similarly, so we really need to put our best leg forward in the race because of the interest of our economy. And of course, the Commission will rely on practitioners and those who are in the front line of dealing with the scope 1, 2, and 3 and the complications of having reliable and comparable data. And it is also about educating the consumer. What is the gold standard? What can you reliably consume knowing that the climate footprint or the carbon footprint is the slowest? Similarly, we're of course making headway with our carbon border adjustment measure, because we also think that if others don't step up their game, we cannot afford to risk carbon leakage to countries of less stringent regulation. So we're taking our efforts, but it has to be a shared undertaking whereby we have continuous dialogue with the industry, stakeholders, and very importantly, the consumers, because it is their consumer choices that define the shape of the marketplace at the end of the day.
Okay, noted. So I'm going to come back to that original question, hoping for an almost yes-no type sort of wrap-up, if you like. So my original question was along the lines of, do you see the efforts in the sector heading in the right direction? So from your side, broadly, would that be a yes? Would it be a yes but, or would it be a no?
I think it would be a yes but. I think by and large, I think everyone's got the best of intentions, but be on the lookout of the greenwashing, because that can be detrimental to the reputation of the whole sector. So if you call it something, make sure that it is what it is.
Okay, noted. Jan, I'm going to come on to you now. You've been waiting patiently there to come in. Now, Rikolto, if my understanding is correct, you're an NGO that works with companies on sustainable food frameworks in the value chain. Could you just give us a few quick brief comments about Rikolto and what you do?
Thank you for the invitation. I'm working for the Belgian part of Rikolto, and Rikolto is an international NGO, an international network organization working in the food system, on agriculture and food. Our mission aims at making sustainable, healthy, nutritious food available for people in cities or city regions all over the world, in Quito, in Hanoi, in Dakar, but also here in Belgium. We work in the context of Antwerp or Louvain or Ghent. And we work with all chain actors, with all actors in the system. For example, we support farmer organizations worldwide to strengthen their business model and to to link them to the market, both informal
I'm with
and
you. So
formal markets.
a whole value chain
Exactly,
focus. So with that perspective in mind, how do you see the sector's efforts when it comes to sustainability? Do you see them as heading in the right direction?
I'm quite positive, to be honest, in the sense that we used to work 10 years ago, for example, with pioneers or front runners in the private sector. For example, we invested in sustainable tea together with Unilever, as an example, or we worked on international value chains on cocoa and coffee together with Colruyt, a big retailer here in Belgium. And they were pioneers working on what we call inclusive business. An inclusive business model is a model that includes, besides economic KPIs, also social and environmental KPIs. And what I see now is that a lot of companies are investing in the core of their business beyond their traditional CSR programs, and that's important, I think. Just to give another example, a few years ago we were invited as a stakeholder, together with a bunch of other stakeholders, of course, by Little Belgium. And they really made a very sharp sustainability policy with bold ambitions and very sharp indicators, and that's interesting.
A good case study of how it can be done effectively. So from the Rikolto point of view, what sort of support in practical terms can you bring to the sector, to the retail and wholesale sector? If you say, look, we can help you with this, this and this in your sustainability challenges, what would those things be?
I would maybe rephrase a little bit your question. At the one hand, you have watchdog NGOs, and they are very important, I think, to keep us sharp. To keep us sharp. That's the word. They defend interests of vulnerable groups, vulnerable consumers, for example, farmers, etc. But you won't change the world, and that's the problem, from a standalone position. So you need all actors in the room. Let's say, because the challenge is so huge and so urgent that we need a system transition. And if you look at producers hardly earning a decent living, you can't expect from them that they invest in sustainability or sustainable production methods. If you look at retailers, for example, working in operating in a very competitive environment with very small margins, if you look at consumers saying that sustainability is very important, but not willing to pay for it, so where is the money? How to cope with this? How to cope with this challenge? So I think we need a profound dialogue with all the actors on true costing, on a fair retribution or of risks, even profits, on transparency, etc., etc. Not to speak about governments, it's very important that governments create level playing fields also, regulations, tax instruments, etc. So again, you need everyone in the room in order to have that needed and urgent transition.
So very strong opportunities for collaboration then.
Exactly, yeah.
And Antje, just a quick question for you before we move on to perhaps some questions from our audience. I know HDE's been working with civil society organisations in its work across the retail and wholesale sector as it does. What insights have you got from working with these organisations? And to what extent do you think the support that comes from the European Commission will be successful in supporting the sector moving forward on sustainability?
Yeah, thank you. Before I answer that question, I would like to react to Elina and the
Please.
greenwashing issue, because I think, I mean, of course, I'm not denying there are always black sheep, but I think in our sector particularly, the reputational risk is so high because we are the connection to the consumer. Yeah. So visibility is very high. So I really don't think this has ever been a viable approach for retail, actually. I mean, and there I would really be very strong. And sometimes also governments do greenwashing. I can give you an example. This was the German government. We had a self-commitment as a sector to ban plastic bags. And this was, of course, after the Commission also launched a kind of goal that was set. And I think we were able to go far beyond that set goal in a very short period of time. And plastic bags were practically banned from food retail. And then our government, which was the old government, in their last weeks, launched a legislation to ban plastic bags in food retail, which was ridiculous because it was banned. So that was greenwashing, nothing else. So I think if you want to have a transition, you really need to it's a give and take on both sides. So, and that's why I said you need this enabling environment on a regulatory side. And I would agree. I mean, we are in the biggest transformation of the last century, maybe even, and that will need a strong regulatory approach and environment. But at the same time, regulations have to be apt to practical issues. For example, again, Germany, sorry, but in some of our Länder, of our regions, we have this crazy idea that if you are a retailer and you are prepared to invest in an e-charger on your parking slot, you also have to build a carport on top of it. So this investment becomes so big that it doesn't really, it's not attractive anymore. I mean, the idea behind this is, of course, that you put on top of the carport solar panels, but the energy of those solar panels will go into the general system and not help you as a retailer. So what I'm trying to say is somehow you have to, it's always fighting for the right strike of balance, you know, that somehow, because there is, of course, a business case, otherwise you will not get the necessary investments. So sorry, I didn't really answer your question. But
you did and you didn't. I mean, I take from that two things. That I think the point was well noted that greenwashing washes both ways,
Yeah.
and we need to be careful of that. And I also pick up a strong point you're making that about what effective collaboration is between the sector and policymakers, whether they be local, regional, national or European, that there needs to be that mutual respect on both sides about creating a legislative framework that's actually feasible and that's thought through good dialogue with each other. So I suppose I take that as an open call to make sure that the channels are properly open both ways, which I think probably we could all agree is quite important. Okay, so I'll come back to that quick question then about working with civil society as well. And just a quick insight perhaps before we open up to our audience.
Well, I think what we did, for example, I mean, you choose your dialogue partners, of course, when you have issues. And for example, now with the energy crisis, we worked very closely with our consumer organization just to find ways, how can we, in our role as retailers, being close to consumers, how can we encourage energy saving on both sides, but also create an understanding why maybe the lights in the stores are not as bright as they used to be. So we had some good initiatives there. And then, of course, for example, if you we are striving for the transformation in traffic, particularly in city centers. So how you need several players on the table. You need local authorities. You need those that provide the electricity. You have to work with a whole infrastructure that needs to be developed somehow. And there are really other major players involved. So I think this working with NGOs always needs to be linked to a certain problem that needs to be solved in a cooperative way. And this is how we actually were quite successful, but rather on a project level, not so much on a broad institutional level, but you have a problem, you have an issue, you need expertise.
So
there's a lot
very
of
focused
expertise.
then on a project level and making sure you've got the full range of people around the table that can help solve the problem. Right, we've got 2 things left to do now, and we've got about 15 minutes left to do it, which seems to me to be a reasonable time budget, everybody. This is the bit where I get off stage and just stretch a little bit. My apologies. I'm approaching 50. The joints are not as flexible as they used to be. Questions? We've heard a lot from our panel. We've heard a lot of points being raised. Are there any questions or pressing comments from our audience we want to bring in? If there is, show me a hand, and then I'll try and allocate speaking space. Okay, so I'll go 1. Could we go 1, 2, the gentleman in the middle, number 3, and the gentleman over here, number 4, please. So 1, 2, 3, 4, please. If I could ask you to avoid long statements and to pose us a question we can answer, please.
Okay, thank you. It's not working.
Is our microphone on, please?
Hello. Yes, thank you very much. My name is Patricia Hoogstraten, representing the Eurocommerce SME Interest Group. I would like to thank Mrs. Bardram for her positive intervention. However, I have a question. We are in the middle of the crisis. We all know that. And transformation has a top priority. However, we discovered that only 20%, maximum 20% of the SMEs have enough funding to do something. So we need support, but we need support now, and we need support in 2022, and in a decent way, of course. But that means funding, financial support, without enormous administrative burden, without extensive calls for a proposal. And my question is, will it be possible to involve European associations, but national associations with SME members, with direct contract, in order to set up a support scheme easily accessible for SME retailers and wholesalers? because this would really be a very relevant innovation in this field.
Let me put that to her if I can. Thank you for the question. So 20% of SMEs only, that's only 1 in 5, currently feel that they've got access to sufficient funding. And we have that proposal there. Can the Commission create a group to focus on that, collaborating together, for example, with associations, to rapidly address the problem?
Well, thanks for that question, Patricia. And indeed, you know, the SMEs are in many cases the engine of our economies, and you know, 1 in 7 people in Europe are employed by the SME sector. So there are lots and lots of you know, broader implications in the sector's well-being. As DG Climate Action, we focus on climate policies and measures. So the industrial cooperation action is in the remit of DG Grow in another department, who will be coming here towards the end of the day, I understand. I know that they are currently already working on the transition pathways for the industry, and that will be something that's highly pertinent in this context. I understand the challenges of immediacy, and in that sense, you know, what's been made available from the European multi-annual financial framework to the national level can be pertinent, and I would encourage, outside of any kind of Brussels facilitated conversations, making those points very pertinently clear to the national authorities in charge of the budgets in the capitals.
Noted,
Thanks.
but could I ask, I mean, on a broad strategic level, is it fair for the whole retail and wholesale sector represented here in the room to see from the Commission that you recognise the immediacy, but a comment that's been mentioned to me many times, if I can be very honest, is we're often told, well, subsidiarity, it's a member state competency, but at the same time, when we saw COVID, we saw European level action as well where it was necessary. Where we saw the energy crisis, we saw European level activity when it was necessary. Even respecting subsidiarity. With raw materials, we see an initiative at European level. With other areas, we see European level initiatives as a means of aiding member states collaboratively with the sector to really make change fast. Is this something on a very broad level, even recognising, yes, it falls also with DG Grow? Is that strategically something the Commission's going to be doing here as well?
Well, the Commission looks at the European economy as a whole, and admittedly, we're dealing with several parallel crises at the moment, which is putting the Commission resources under extreme pressure, unprecedented pressure, and the speed at which we've been responding to COVID, to the energy crisis, is nothing short of a miracle. But I can also tell you that it's been testing the very limits of the institutions. What we're trying to provide is predictability in terms of energy prices. We're trying to provide predictability in terms of how the member states can best deal with the external shocks that they're facing on a day-to-day basis. At the same time, of course, we want to have a foresight element to our reflection, and there are ongoing discussions. Whenever the Commission goes, say, beyond its exclusive competencies as defined in the Lisbon Treaties, that has to be fully supported and, in fact, demanded by the member states, because we don't want to also create a blurry line between what the division of competencies is. But I take good note of the points raised by Eurocommerce, and certainly will make sure that in the relevant inter-service consultations, including when talking about the transition pathways, those points are well understood. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, so we've got one more question now here, please, yeah?
Thank you. John Walker, European Small Business Alliance. First of all, can I congratulate you as the facilitator for raising the point of accessibility to funding programs. This has been a constant problem that SMEs have found over the years trying to access these funding streams that they don't have a bureaucracy department to fill in the form, whereas larger businesses do. Trying to make products more environmentally friendly, a lot of small business retailers, which I've been one for 3 years, admittedly some years back, you're very much in the hands of what the wholesaler or the producer brings. So if you want, for example, if you go in one of these large shops and you want to buy 3 or 4 nuts and bolts, you've got to buy a large box with a very large plastic sleeve because there's not so many staff around to serve. So they want to reduce staff costs as well as trying to reduce theft. So we do have this, what I often call the push-me-pull-you effect of environment versus trying to keep jobs in the economy going. The same applies for joints of meat and various other things. Finally, yes, I have got a point which I want to ask. Does the Commission representative envisage there being a statutory return for small businesses to do? Because the increasing amount of returns and forms that have to be done, particularly they say, oh, it's easy to do it, you've got digitalisation now. Do you envisage there being a digital tax return on environmental compliance as a result of what we're talking about today? Thank you.
Thanks for the question. It is indeed a very specific question. I would not be able to from my perspective and department, to be able to answer that. But I can put it forward to colleagues in DG Grow and in DG Taxud. But I am not aware of any current plans in that direction. Thanks.
Okay, so noted. Right, we have one more question, I believe, here, and then one over here as well.
Thank you. My name is Manu. I represent IKEA here. This question is to pretty much the whole panel here. So over the past few years, IKEA has been consistently doing things which fall under the overall sustainability sphere: traceability, due diligence, decarbonization. But what we have now seen is that a lot of those initiatives which were under the umbrella of sustainability are now more and more coming into the regulatory sphere. So the Green Deal and other regulations are now governing a lot of that. So a lot of what these investments in sustainability will look like might actually end up as just being meeting compliance requirements. And so my question is, I mean, we saw this report in the morning from McKinsey that talked about 600 billion of investments to 2030, of which about 300 billion would be in sustainability. How much of that should companies actually plan for as actual investments, and how much should be seen more as meeting future compliance requirements? Like Ms. Elina mentioned that the Green Deal is actually directing investments by member states. But would that also mean that in future it would be directing investments by private companies? Or should companies just look at these kind of regulatory landscape to see where they should put money rather than any investments to increase the business?
Okay, noted. I'll open that up.
I'll go back to my very first starting point. I think the Green Deal has irreversibly pegged the European economic future into the net zero. And you know, we have the climate law, which is a legally binding framework that will take us to net zero. So that gives you a very good view of the operating environment in which Europe will be doing business. And beyond that, what we see happening across the world is this transition to low carbon, to net zero, and the businesses are following that very closely. So what I think any kind of scenario planner should do in any business is to calibrate the plans according to that transition. And that's where the transition pathways, which Grow is working on, is going to kick in as well. Whether it's a question of compliance or doing good business, that's something that will need to be configured. At the same time, the union and from the Commission side, we will be looking at not just the taxonomy, not just the different criteria for climate proofing investment, but also we'll be looking at green claims and different labeling schemes in order to bring some discipline and understanding to it. And I think the retail sector is our probably one of the best partners in this, because as was very rightly said, the immediacy of exposure, that the reputational risk that is so very close to the very core of operations is so great that you are a very good measurement, temperature of what is being appreciated and understood by the citizen as well in this context. So I do think that there is a lot of scope and space for furthering the conversation in order to bring this kind of sunshine or transparency aspect into the industry at large when looking at, okay, what is being labeled as green or compatible with net zero truly lives up to that. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. I believe we've got one more question over here.
Hello, Laos van Delft, European Dairy Association. We're also involved in the whole sustainability debate. I had a short question. I would say it's for the whole panel, because are we transparent enough about the fact that some of the objectives that are mentioned here bite each other? I get the idea, great reports, all of nice initiatives, but a particular example of dairy, that is, I see the replacement of milk by plant-based beverages, which might make, from a CO2 perspective, might make sense. But at the same time, you cannot sell it as promoting healthy diet, consumer education, because that is just not the fact from a nutritional value point of view. So are we transparent enough indeed that you maybe cannot do everything at the same time, or that we make choices in, that we make choices?
Okay, I'll let someone pick up on that. Anyone want to comment on that? For me, it relates a little bit also to integration of different areas of policy in a sense. The risk of so-called substitution, perhaps if you wanted to pick that one up from a Commission point of view. Because the problem sometimes if you push too hard in one area, you pull in the other.
Thanks, David. I would like someone else to pick that up. No, I can, we're dealing with a really important time in history. There are no comfortable choices left anymore. So, whether it's about dietary choices, whether it's about, carbon farming or land use in a way that actually allows us to maximize the sink capacity of farmland. These are all things that, maybe 10 years ago sounded like science fiction, but everything needs to be on the table now. What we see over the summers in terms of climate impact is pretty scary. So from our point of view, of course, whenever we come forward with a regulatory proposal, be it about due diligence, be it about labeling or compliance, we do go through an in-depth impact assessment, which looks at, deep implications on social, economic, and environmental perspective. And we also embark in these lengthy public consultations so that, associations and businesses and citizens have their voice heard in that process of Commission developing regulations. So while we might not be the fastest operator, we actually do have the obligation by law to take into consideration multiple dimensions. Does it mean that we always get it 100% right? No, but that's why we also have these review clauses and monitoring systems in place. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Right, we've reached that time now where lunch is imminent, and we have one last thing to do before lunch becomes more imminent, which is just get some closing words from each of our speakers. So our focus here broadly was on the idea of sustainability and making it an opportunity in what is self-evidently a time of crisis. So with that in mind, I'm going to ask just for some very brief, and I stress brief, closing words. Chris, first from you, what would be your takeaways from this panel for our audience here today?
Very, very briefly, I would say that this idea of integration, I think integration within business, the integration between your business and your sustainability strategy, your business strategy should be your sustainability strategy. I think this idea of integration between the sustainability, digitalization, and skills agendas. And then I think, to the point earlier, this idea of integration in terms of a whole economy approach to regulation and policy, and hopefully addressing some of the concerns raised there so that you're not necessarily focused on one area with unintended consequences.
For the other. Thank you very much. Britta?
Well, actually, I would take the, let's say, necessary collaboration when we are talking about changing products and Scope 3 emissions. I think this is something where we really have to focus on, and what I take here as a takeaway, that we work together on that topic, because 1 and 2, we have a lot in our own hands, right? But for 3, we really have to work in a, full supply chain.
Full supply chain approach for Scope 3, very definitely clear from you. Antje, takeaways from you?
Yeah, I can take up what Britta just said. I think it's about cooperation. It's about going out of silos. It's about search for the best ideas and solution. To me, it's also about being technology driven, being open for innovation. And I think we also have to see, we will in this process of transformation have dilemma situations all the time. And I think we somehow need to be able to learn to cope with that. We might not always make the best choice, but then we might need to go back and do it better. So I think it's just a very long process.
Yeah, but necessary to be bold, perhaps, and resilient in that process too. I'm going to go Doireann, Jan, and then I'll come, Elina, to you to give us a few closing words as well.
To get a break.
Okay. Right,
so closing thoughts, action, right? It's no longer just about commitment, it's about moving from commitment to action. If you want to know what to do about your Scope 3 Net Zero Playbook, 21 interventions, 50 case studies, read it, take inspiration. The second thing is, do not do it alone, right? That's really, really important. And it is a mindset shift that needs to happen in retail, wholesale, consumer goods. It's not the enemy. It's we can only do it by coming together, talking, and figuring out a way forward, be it at product level, be it at service level, whatever is transport and logistics, plastics. That is a conversation that you need to have together along with your supply chain and with bringing in innovative NGOs, different technologies as well to help that collaboration along the way.
Okay, noted. And Jan?
The same comments. We are talking about system change. That's a wicked, complex challenge, I think. Therefore, we need all actors in the room, as I already said. And we have to create also learning space. There is a lot to learn among actors, so that learning space, besides standards and regulations, etc., is very important. Learning space on what I call inclusive business. What does it mean, inclusive business? Business including environmental and social KPIs.
Noted. So Elina, I've left the last word for you. You've heard a lot, obviously, in the discussions about the challenges of balancing sustainability with cost investment for the sector, based on its margins, based on its situation. Particularly, what are you going to take back? I know you've already very openly and honestly noted for us some of the points you're going to take back to the Commission. But what are the key points that you're going to take back from the Commission side from the discussions we've had so far today?
Well, I think my key takeaway is really a positive one. It's that there is a lot of good energy, enthusiasm and determination among the representatives of the sector. And I think there certainly is more scope for continuous dialogue around the challenges, but also the opportunities. And maybe we need to establish platforms between the practitioners and regulators that come to these questions more often. Again, I can't commit my colleagues from the main lead department of DG Grow, but I am very encouraged by the conversation here. I think that there's a lot of tremendously important work going on. And I also agree, one should not go alone. We can learn from each other. We can also exert peer pressure when there are some of not so reliable practices. around, and looking at the different methodologies to improve information available to consumers, but also across the sector is going to be super important. So very pleased to have participated today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And can we have a closing round of applause for our panel, please?